More now on another big story we're following. Donald Gates, who was sentenced to life in prison 28 years ago, was set free by the same judge who sent him behind bars. The jury wrongfully convicted Gates in the 1981 murder of Catherine Schilling, who was a Georgetown student. Gates always maintained his innocence, but it wasn't until new DNA evidence was discovered that Gates finally got his wish to be set free. His friends were in court yesterday when the judge ordered him free.
He wasn't the type of guy. And sometimes, man, we used to go to church together, I said, Gates, I heard that, said, Gates didn't do that. But the side that happened, I didn't get in contact with him. I lost contact with him. But like I said, once again, my condolences go out to his family. But he should be, compensated.
2 more DNA tests are being done to confirm the identities of Donald Gates and Catherine Schilling. Both sides are due back in court next week, where Gates is expected to be fully exonerated. For more insight into these types of cases, we're joined by Shawn, Executive Director of the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project. Good morning, Shawn.
Good morning, Allison. Thank you.
In a nutshell, what does your organization do?
What we do is try to prevent and correct the conviction of innocent people in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia.
That is a very weighty task, but we've seen, like with this case, just in the news now, that there are wrongfully convicted people, and I'm sure it probably happens more often than we think. But in this case, Donald Gates spent 28 years behind bars for really, arguably the most heinous of crimes, rape and murder. Does it usually take this long to get evidence reintroduced? Was this an unusual case? What are your thoughts about it?
The average is about 11 years, so this was a very long time. I mean, he's been in prison since I was 4.
Right.
And, it can take a while to find the evidence to test. I mean, Mr. Gates has been trying to get DNA testing since 1988, but no one could find the evidence to test. And so these cases take, the first case I ever worked on took 4 months, and the next case I worked on took 10 years.
Right.
And so there's just a huge range because when you're dealing with old cases, it's just tough to piece things together.
We're not going to talk about the specifics of this case necessarily, but your insight while we have you here, we have to talk about this hair evidence that was what basically put Mr. Gates behind bars. But you had an FBI analyst and you also had an informer say this is the guy and this is the evidence here. How reliable is something like hair evidence?
Well, hair evidence, unfortunately, isn't science. In February of this year, the National Academy of Sciences came out with a report totally discrediting hair analysis. And actually, I think about 22% of the first 225 DNA exonerations were in cases where hair analysis had been used. So it just doesn't really, it's not science. The hairs on my head are different.
Right.
So you can't necessarily match them up. So you can get false positives and you can also get false negatives. And people are really shying away from using it now, but back then, it's something people used a lot.
But DNA is science.
Yes.
And that is what was the ticket to proving his innocence.
Exactly. They were lucky enough that they were able to work with a great cold case detective at MPD who was able to help them find the physical evidence in the medical examiner's office where no one knew anything had been stored, and they were able to get the test done.
I'm sure you get a lot of these cases, people saying, I'm innocent. And, that's the old thing that people say when they go in. Everybody in here says they're innocent. But indeed, there are innocent people that are in prison. How does the process, sort of in a nutshell, go? Because I'm sure somebody's watching that's very interested in that as well. What does your office do as far as trying to find the evidence to let people that are truly innocent free?
Well, what we start doing, we try to answer 2 questions. The first question is whether we think the person might be innocent. And we look at the types of evidence that were used to convict the person and things like that. But the second question is whether there's a way to prove it. Obviously, if we can look for DNA evidence to test, that's the gold standard. But if there isn't DNA, which there isn't in most cases, we really want to try to figure out who did it. Or, try to prove maybe in some cases that a crime never actually happened. And so that's kind of where we start. And it's a lot like tackling a cold case.
Right. I was going to say, it's exactly like a cold case. Right.
Yeah, which is why we actually work with cold case detectives a lot.
Okay. Again, we're not exactly talking about Mr. Gates, but does your office do anything, or what would a person who has spent 28 years behind bars, who's now coming out to a whole new world, what happens next for these people?
Right. It's a really tough adjustment. I mean, if you think about it, he's never seen a cell phone.
Right.
He doesn't have an ATM card. Just little things like that are part of our daily lives. He doesn't know what they are. And so there are people who do work with the exonerated. I think I helped his lawyers get in touch with the Innocence Project in Ohio, where Mr. Gates is from, so that they can start working with him. And there are compensation statutes. D.C. has an unjust imprisonment law that is out there for people who have been wrongfully convicted, so at least he can get some measure of compensation. You know, it's never enough,
right.
But at least there could be something for him. But it's a tough adjustment for people. I think everyone expects them to be so happy to be free that there are no problems, and it's rough.
But you said it's a whole lifetime, 28 years.
Exactly.
Shawn Armbrust, Executive Director with Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project. Really good insight. Thanks for being with us
Great.
today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Steve, over to you.